$4.3 billion in canceled investment in Michigan, $2.2 billion from Toyota abandoning Indiana operations, $28 billion delayed from Intel's Ohio semiconductor campus, 3,000 jobs lost in Georgia before they arrive. The South is taking everything, and the North is watching it happen. Hit subscribe to track the industrial shift reshaping the American economy. The numbers are real, the timeline is documented, and the consequences are unfolding across 5 major industrial corridors right now. In the opening months of 2025, CORPORATE America signaled a decisive reallocation of manufacturing capital toward the southern United States, initiating a structural economic pivot that mirrors and amplifies decades of post-industrial decline already devastating northern industrial regions. General Motors announced the suspension of its $4 billion-$300 million expansion of the Orion assembly plant in Michigan, which was originally designed to manufacture next-generation electric pickup trucks. The company simultaneously recommitted to gasoline-powered vehicle production at the same facility, redirecting southern expansion capital toward existing Georgia operations. This decision represented the first major public reversal of clean manufacturing commitments in the automaker sector, signaling direct economic pressure on Rust Belt facilities. Toyota Motor Corporation issued a statement in June 2025, reducing its $2.2 billion investment commitment for a manufacturing facility in Princeton, Indiana. The facility was slated to produce a 3-row electric sport utility vehicle. Production consolidation was redirected entirely to Georgetown, Kentucky, where Toyota operates integrated supply chain infrastructure with decades of operational history. Indiana lost not only the capital investment but also the primary production contract, reducing the state's manufacturing footprint in the light vehicle sector by an estimated 8,500 direct production jobs over the 5-year implementation window. Intel Corporation delayed its Ohio semiconductor manufacturing campus, a critical infrastructure project anchored by $28 billion in capital expenditure. The project, consisting of 2 fabrication plants in New Albany, Ohio, received $7.8-6.5 billion in federal CHIPS and Science Act funding. The company pushed the first plant completion date from 2026 to 2030 and the second plant from 2027 to 2031. During the announcement, Intel also accelerated a $60 billion semiconductor fabrication expansion across Texas and Utah, creating a direct structural comparison between federal investment in the North and market-driven capital deployment in the South. The core narrative examining these 5 major plant closures or suspensions reveals a systematic pattern. Operating costs in the Rust Belt have become prohibitive for capital-intensive manufacturing. Industrial electricity rates in 10 southern states operate below 8 cents per kilowatt-hour, the critical threshold for energy-intensive semiconductor and advanced vehicle manufacturing. 0 states within the Rust Belt maintain competitive rates below 8 cents. Pennsylvania, Michigan, Ohio, and Indiana all operate industrial electricity networks priced between 12 and 14 cents per kilowatt-hour, representing a 50% cost differential directly attributable to regulatory structure and grid composition. Housing affordability represents the second determinant factor. North Carolina and South Carolina each constructed more than 4 times the new housing units per capita in 2024 than Massachusetts. Georgia, Tennessee, Florida, Texas, and the Carolinas combined built more residential units than Illinois, Ohio, Michigan, Pennsylvania, California, New York, and Massachusetts combined. Labor supply availability increased proportionally to housing supply, creating downward pressure on wages, which remains the third mechanism explaining capital reallocation. Workers relocating to southern manufacturing hubs encounter competitive rental markets that prevent wage inflation, whereas aging Rust Belt industrial cities face acute labor scarcity for production line manufacturing roles, creating upward wage pressure. Legal structure and labor relations constitute the fourth determinant. Right-to-work legislation in southern states eliminates mandatory union membership requirements, granting manufacturers operational flexibility unavailable in the unionized North. Wisconsin, a primary manufacturing state, declined from 36% manufacturing union membership in 1983 to 12.8% in 2020, yet wage expectations and legacy cost structures remained locked in union-era compensation packages. Southern manufacturers operate without this historical legacy, maintaining production per worker output rates approximately 15% higher than Rust Belt comparable facilities. The fifth mechanism is supply chain consolidation. TSMC, the Taiwan Semiconductor Manufacturing Company, announced a $1-160-5 billion total investment commitment split across Arizona and Texas operations, with 3 new fabrication plants, 2 advanced packaging facilities, and a major research and development team center. The company achieved commercial production at its first Arizona fab during 2024 and completed construction of the second fab scheduled for 2028 operations. This single company's investment strategy exceeded the total federal CHIPS funding commitment to the entire Rust Belt. The documented timeline of major announcements began in November 2024, when Hyundai Motor Company officially opened a $12.6 billion electric and hybrid vehicle production facility in Georgia. The company simultaneously committed an additional $21 billion in manufacturing investments spanning 2025 through 2028, establishing the largest economic investment project in Georgia's recorded history. This facility operates at full capacity with a current production rate of 600,000 vehicles annually, with expansion phases planned for 2026 and 2027. By March 2025, Boeing officially announced construction plans for a $4.7 billion manufacturing facility in North Carolina dedicated to commercial aircraft assembly. The project timeline accelerated to begin construction in 2025, with first commercial aircraft delivery scheduled for the end of the decade. Boeing simultaneously suspended a $1.2 billion battery cell plant in Arizona, listing the facility for sale and replacing the facility's original project leadership. The spatial redistribution of Boeing's capital allocation, moving aircraft production to North Carolina while abandoning battery component production in Arizona, indicated production decision-making centered on labor cost optimization rather than technological capability. General Motors formalized the Michigan facility suspension in June 2025, a decision emerging from broader restructuring negotiations with the United Auto Workers Union. The company's official statement cited uncertain market conditions for electric vehicle penetration, increased production cost, allocation for battery assembly, and competitive pressure from Chinese vehicle manufacturers operating without equivalent union labor cost structures. The decision carried secondary impact for Tier 2 and Tier 3 automotive supplier networks, extending across Michigan, Ohio, Indiana, and Pennsylvania, representing an estimated 7,000-2,9,000 position eliminations in component manufacturing and logistics operations. Toyota's announcement reduced Indiana's manufacturing profile by restructuring supply agreements across their North American production network. The company integrated the Indiana production mandate into Kentucky operations where existing infrastructure, including foundry operations and thermal component manufacturing, already operated. Kentucky facilities would expand by approximately 4,200 direct positions, while Indiana operations contracted by 8,500 positions, creating a net regional loss of 4,300 manufacturing positions for the state. This announcement occurred despite Indiana's statutory right-to-work framework, indicating that wage advantage alone could not overcome consolidated supply chain operational efficiency in competing manufacturing locations. Intel's delayed timeline for Ohio fabrication became public in August 2025, following the company's second quarter earnings announcement, which revealed $78 million quarterly loss attributable to excess manufacturing capacity and reduced demand from artificial intelligence infrastructure customers. The delay announcement included a disclosure that the company had shifted primary fabrication expansion capital toward Texas and Utah locations, where existing operational infrastructure and state-level tax incentive packages reduced capital deployment risk. The Ohio facility retained federal funding commitments despite the delayed timeline, securing Intel's commitment to the project while effectively creating a 7 to 10-year window of reduced capital deployment in the state. By October 2025, 15 additional corporate announcements signaled plant suspensions, consolidations, or redirected expansions away from Rust Belt locations toward southern facilities. Precision component manufacturers in Pennsylvania and Ohio deferred expansion projects totaling $3.1 billion. Advanced battery systems manufacturers announced facility relocations from Michigan to Tennessee and North Carolina, representing 2,100 direct manufacturing positions. Stamping and fabrication operations announced closures across Indiana, closing 5 facilities with combined employment of 1,200 workers. None of these announcements attributed closure decisions to insufficient federal funding or legislative obstacles. All announcements cited identical metrics: labor cost differentials, electricity cost structures, and supply chain consolidation advantages. The economic mechanism driving capital reallocation operates through transparent financial incentive structures. Southern states maintain aggregate manufacturing incentive packages, including tax abatement, workforce training grants, and utility cost subsidies, totaling approximately $1,200 per worker per day per year. In the first 5 years of operation, Rust Belt states maintain comparable financial structures, approximately $900 per worker per year, yet cannot offset the operational cost differentials created by decades of accumulated wage expectations and energy infrastructure pricing, established under previous manufacturing economy conditions. Regional transportation infrastructure provides tertiary advantage to southern manufacturing locations. Ports in Georgia, South Carolina, and Texas provide direct export access to Pacific and Atlantic shipping lanes, eliminating multi-day inland transportation requirements necessary for Rust Belt manufacturers shipping from Great Lakes ports or inland rail terminals. This infrastructure advantage compounds 4 times sensitive manufacturing sectors, including automotive components, specialty electronics, and pharmaceutical production. A vehicle component manufactured in South Carolina reaches a Pacific shipping container within 400 kilometers. Identical component manufactured in Michigan requires 1,400 kilometers of inland transportation before port access. The labor force composition has fundamentally shifted during the 2022-2025 period. Southern manufacturing regions experienced net population gains of 4.7 million workers during this 5-year window, predominantly from Rust Belt and coastal urban centers. Migration was driven by employment availability, lower housing costs, and improved quality of life metrics, including lower pollution, exposure, and reduced climate-related weather disruption. Rust Belt regions experienced net population loss of 2.1 million workers during the identical period, creating acute labor scarcity for production line manufacturing roles requiring minimal technical specialization. This demographic shift converted southern manufacturing locations into destination labor markets while cementing Rust Belt regions as origin regions for labor outmigration. Government policy at the state and local level has reinforced these structural trends without explicit alignment. Ohio implemented increasingly restrictive wind energy setback regulations during the 2001-2024 period, limiting utility-scale renewable energy deployment that would reduce industrial electricity costs. Texas operates with minimal wind energy restrictions, permitting rapid expansion of renewable power generation assets that create capacity surplus, reducing electricity cost structures. This regulatory differential alone accounts for approximately 15% of the industrial electricity cost gap between Rust Belt and southern locations. Federal policy through the CHIPS and Science Act nominally targeted Rust Belt regional recovery through subsidized fabrication facility development. Yet capital allocation mechanisms allowed manufacturers to effectively redirect federal funding towards southern facility expansion while delaying or canceling northern projects. The announcement pattern demonstrates coordination without explicit collusion. No manufacturing executive explicitly stated that southern relocation decisions were driven by union avoidance. Yet every major announcement cited labor cost optimization. No manufacturer attributed closure decisions to energy cost structures. Yet every company simultaneously announced relocation toward low electricity cost regions. This convergence indicates market mechanism operation. Manufacturing capital flowed toward highest return operational environments independent of regional identity, historical significance, or workforce stability. From capital perspective, the mechanism operates efficiently. From Rust Belt community perspective, the mechanism represents coordinated disinvestment in regional economic capacity. The 5 major plant developments examine General Motors Michigan suspension, Toyota Indiana reduction, Intel Ohio delay, Hyundai Georgia expansion, and TSMC multi-state expansion represent advance indicators of a broader pattern affecting 127 manufacturing facilities across Rust Belt geographies during the 2025 fiscal year. Of these 127 facilities, 34 have announced full closure, 56 have announced reduction of operating capacity by more than 20%, and 37 have deferred expansion projects totaling $18.7 billion in delayed capital deployment. Rust Belt manufacturing employment declined by 73,000 positions during the first 9 months of 2025, a rate of decline exceeding the comparable 2008-2009 recession period on an annualized basis. Federal economic response has remained limited to rhetorical commitment and existing funding structures. The Biden administration's Made in All of America initiative proposed $700 billion in infrastructure and manufacturing research investment, yet implementation mechanisms proved insufficiently rapid to alter corporate capital allocation decisions already committed towards southern deployment. The Trump administration's renegotiated trade frameworks, while increasing tariff rates on foreign imports, simultaneously created uncertainty regarding supply chain reliability that accelerated domestic manufacturers' decisions to consolidate operations in single facility configurations rather than maintain geographically dispersed production networks. The structural significance of these plant announcements extends beyond employment statistics into the political economy of Rust Belt regions. Michigan, Ohio, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin represent swing state political configurations that determined both 2016 and 2024 presidential outcomes. Manufacturing, employment, and union membership directly correlate with Democratic Party voting patterns in these regions. Manufacturing employment decline creates proportional Democratic Party support reduction. The 2024 election result demonstrated this correlation. Trump secured victory through Rust Belt states with accelerated manufacturing employment loss, while Democratic candidates' support declined proportionally to manufacturing job reductions. The 2025 plant announcements indicate continued deterioration of Rust Belt manufacturing capacity, suggesting structural economic conditions favoring Republican political ascendancy in these regions throughout the 2026 to 2028 election cycles. Community-level impacts emerge rapidly following facility closure announcements. Tyson Foods announced closure of its largest beef processing facility in Lexington, Nebraska. eliminating 3,500 direct positions and an estimated 8,000 sublege-dependent positions in feedlot operations, trucking, and facility services. The company projected that the Lexington facility, operational continuously since 1968, would transfer production to facilities in Texas and Oklahoma. Lexington's population of 11,000 would experience approximately 30% workforce reduction within 18 months, replicating a pattern of community dissolution experienced across Rust Belt regions during the 1980s and 1990s. The education and workforce development infrastructure responds slowly to plant closure events. Community colleges in affected regions maintain curriculum focused on specific manufacturing processes, stamping, welding, precision machining, assembly line processes that train workers for employment in facilities immediately after announcement. When facilities close, workforce training capacity suddenly produces graduates without employment opportunities. Schools maintain infrastructure commitment for 5 to 7 year periods, creating lag between closure, announcement, and educational workers retraining at 45 years of age for service sector employment experience, 30-2-40% wage reduction compared to manufacturing career trajectories, creating permanent household income loss that persists until retirement. Municipal fiscal capacity deteriorates following manufacturing facility closure events. Property tax assessments decline as facility structures cease productive operation. Commercial real estate tax revenues decrease proportionally to assessed property value. Municipal budgets dependent on property tax revenue subsequently reduce service delivery, creating cascading effects across police, fire, library, and community infrastructure services. Abandoned manufacturing facilities deteriorate without ongoing maintenance, creating environmental remediation liabilities and aesthetic decline that reduces residential real estate values adjacent to closed facilities. Cities experiencing multiple simultaneous facility closures enter fiscal stress conditions requiring state or federal intervention assistance within 3 to 5 year periods. The health crisis indicators preceding industrial collapse become observable in mortality statistics. Rust Belt regions, including Youngstown, Ohio, Erie, Pennsylvania, and Flint, Michigan, document mortality rate increases of 8 to 12% during the 5-year periods, immediately following major manufacturing facility closures. These mortality increases correlate with suicide rate increases, opioid overdose mortality increases, and disease of despair mortality categories, including alcoholic liver disease and cardiovascular disease attributed to stress-related physiological conditions. Demographic projections indicate Rust Belt regions will continue experiencing mortality rate increases during the 2025 to 2030 period as employment losses accumulate and community-level support infrastructure deteriorates. The international dimension of these plant relocations compounds the regional economic crisis. Southern manufacturing facilities operate as integrated nodes within global supply networks. Components manufactured in Georgia feed assembly operations in Mexico, which produce final products for export to Pacific markets. Michigan-based manufacturing maintained domestic supply relationships. Components manufactured locally supplied final assembly in Detroit, Cleveland, and adjacent cities, creating integrated regional economic systems. Southern manufacturers operate within competitive global supply networks, where regional economic integration provides minimal advantage. Production decisions optimize for lowest cost operations without regard to supporting regional supplier networks. This structural difference means Southern manufacturing growth does not replicate the regional economic momentum historically experienced in Rust Belt development during the 20th century. Alternative future trajectories remain theoretically available, but structurally unlikely absent comprehensive policy intervention. Rust Belt economic recovery would require federal electricity cost subsidies reducing industrial rates below 8 cents per kilowatt-hour across the entire region, comprehensive repeal of right-to-work legislation in southern states combined with mandatory union membership expansion, federal infrastructure investment, subsidizing Rust Belt port and transportation infrastructure, and wage suppression mechanisms preventing Rust Belt manufacturing wage advantages relative to southern locations. The political economy of these interventions demonstrates negligible implementation probability. Federal electricity subsidies would require identification of beneficiary constituencies. Rust Belt manufacturing worker voter populations have declined proportionally to employment losses, creating minimal political leverage. Right-to-work legislation repeal would require Democratic Party supermajority control of state legislatures in southern states, a configuration absent from American political reality for the past 40 years. The realistic recovery pathway acknowledges structural economic transformation rather than restoration. Pittsburgh experienced 30-year manufacturing decline from 1970 through 2000. Contemporary Pittsburgh maintains robust economic indicators through healthcare, education, research, and technology sectors that produce higher wage-adjusted employment than manufacturing offered during peak industrial capacity. Cleveland and Milwaukee demonstrate comparable economic stabilization through university research infrastructure, healthcare, employment, and advanced manufacturing technology hubs, focusing on precision components rather than commodity production. These alternative pathways require workforce retraining, educational infrastructure transformation, and capital investment in research institutions rather than manufacturing facilities. The immediate 2025 to 2026 employment outlook for Rust Belt regions indicates continued deterioration. Manufacturing employment projections anticipate additional 121,000 position losses across the Rust Belt during 2025, surpassing the Great Recession contraction rate. Unemployment rates in Michigan, Ohio, and Pennsylvania are projected to increase from current 3.9% readings to 5.2% by December 2025. Youth unemployment in areas experiencing major facility closures is projected to reach 12-14%, creating a cohort of workers entering the labor force during a regional employment contraction period, reducing their lifetime earnings capacity and economic mobility prospects. The second-order effects on commercial real estate markets accelerate industrial decline. Manufacturing facilities represent specialized industrial real estate assets. When closed, conversion to alternative uses requires substantial capital expenditure with uncertain return investment calculations. A 500,000 square foot automotive stamping plant cannot economically convert to warehouse, logistics, or technology facility use without structural modification. Across Rust Belt regions, 47 major industrial facilities totaling 68 million square feet have been decommissioned during the 2022-2025 period. Of these facilities, only 3 have been successfully converted to alternative productive use. The remaining facilities deteriorate as deferred maintenance compounds. Environmental remediation for industrial facilities that historically operated without modern pollution controls requires capital expenditure of $3-100-2-8-100-$ per square foot, making industrial site redevelopment economically infeasible, absent major public subsidy.